My personal favorite is the 8-sequence story structure. The reason I like this one is it allows you to break down a feature film into 8 different sections and then piecing them together. But not only this, it teaches you to think of each of these sequences as their own separate short film. Writing a 120-page feature can be intimidating, but writing 8 short films, one at a time, becomes a much more achievable task. If you've already familiarized yourself with the 3-act structure, then you can use that as a helpful guide to understand the 8-sequence structure. The 3-act structure has Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. With the 8-sequence story structure, sequence 1 and 2 equal Act 1. Sequences 3, 4, 5, and 6 equal Act 2, and sequences 7 and 8 equal Act 3. The first sequence is still about introducing the status quo, the world, and the characters, but thinking of it as its own short film helps us create mini arcs to make each sequence more engaging and interesting for the viewer. So the first 8 to 12 minutes of the film will have its own beginning, middle, and end. The first sequence typically ends with the inciting incident, leading us into sequence 2 and onto the next mini-movie. Sequence 2 is the period of time where the protagonist has received the call to action, but spends this time denying it. The main conflict is them resisting the call, and ultimately, by the end of sequence 2, for whatever reason, are now thrust onto the journey with no way back. Sequence 3 is when the protagonist faces their obstacle now that they are out in the big scary world. The stakes are raised and the hero starts to realize the challenges they are about to face. Sequence 4 is the fun and games moment of your story. So again, if you're making a superhero movie, this is where you reward your audience for coming to watch your movie by giving them some entertaining sequences of your character attempting to use their new powers. Or in a rom-com, we see those funny moments in the new relationship. Sequence 5 stops the fun and games in their tracks and starts introducing more twists and turns, and starts testing the relationships that have been established. The fun is over and trouble is coming. This is when the protagonist might protest against the things they've learned or rebel against their own growth. Sequence 6 is where all of Act 2 either culminates into something good or the protagonist reaches their lowest low. This depends on the type of story you're trying to tell. If your character wins in the end, then this would likely be a low point. If your protagonist loses in the end, then this is when they would have a big victory. Sequence 7 is the climax. Pretty self-explanatory at this stage. This is where your protagonist has the ultimate win or the ultimate loss. Sequence 8 and the final short film of your feature is the resolution. This is the final sequence where the journey we've been on since sequence 1 finally comes to an end. As you're working on each of these sequences, just remind yourself to think of each of them as their own separate story. But then as you make your way through them, remember that they all still need to come together into one big story. Giving each section its own beginning, middle, and end will help you overcome the daunting task of filling in all of those blank pages. And remember, these structures are not rigid blueprints, but flexible frameworks designed to spark your imagination, help you shape your narrative, and bring your characters to life. Your story is ultimately your own. It's a product of your creativity, your experiences, and your voice. Use these structures as tools, but always let your unique storytelling style shine through. And until our next lesson, keep writing, keep experimenting, and above all, keep telling your stories.